My name is John Fioretta. I'm a member of the Silicon Valley South Group. I'm the liaison for Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren. And for some time now, I've been our liaison with the what used to be the San Jose Mercury News and is now the Bay Area Mercury News. We're very fortunate to have Barbara Marshman with us. Little background on Barbara. She grew up in Pennsylvania on a farm, went into journalism with a variety of small newspapers in the Philadelphia area, and then she got a very prestigious John S. Knight Fellowship to go to Stanford, and has been a Silicon Valley resident ever since. The last 20 years, she's been an editorial writer with the Mercury News. And for the last 10 years, she's been the editorial page's editor. So we're very fortunate to have someone with her experience talk to us today. And Barbara is someone who has been a longtime advocate for open space and walkable cities. And I know this because when I was working on open space issues back in the late 80s and early 90s, she was one of the people I encountered at that time. So that's how long I've known Barbara. She is going to be retiring at the end of this month, and her husband Will is here. And she plans on, doing some part-time work as the occasion presents itself in media, and also hopefully with the environment. So we're very fortunate to have Barbara Marshman here. So let's give her a big CCL welcome. And we're going to do this entirely question and answer. Because we want to get as many questions and answers out. We had several CCL groups provide us with questions beforehand, and so that's the list I'm going to be operating off of. And then when we get done with those, I think they're more basic questions, and we can get into your questions. But before we do that, congratulations on your retirement. Also, your support for the climate and the environment will be missed and has been greatly appreciated. But can you give us any scoops on what might happen once you leave the editorial position you're in?
Well, this is let's say unplanned retirement for me. I had hoped to go part-time and spend all my time writing this spring, writing a column, but we're going through some staffing cuts now, and buyouts were offered, and I have decided it's time to step aside. Unfortunately, that means I'm leaving, and my one-person staff will be the only one staying. That is Ed Clendaniel. He has been the letters editor, and he writes about a lot of environmental issues. So you're on solid ground as far as support goes, but there will be probably more limited local writing on the pages, and I hope we can still produce a daily editorial page, but a lot is up in the air right now. In fact, I sort of tried to get out of this with John. I said, all of a sudden I'm leaving and I don't know what's going on. He said, oh, come anyway. So here I am. I'm sorry to have kept you waiting.
No, it's okay. Let's start with the basics. Criteria for selection. What does the Mercury News look for when selecting letters to the editor and op-eds for publication, and who decides?
Okay. Letters and op-eds will take separately. Letters we put together every day based largely on what has come in that day, although we do save some timeless ones to get ahead. We put the Saturday page together often on Wednesday. So, but basically we're choosing from what is current and timely, and what might be a great letter one day might the next day not be a great letter, because there are lots of others that are more timely and also to give us a better balance of what's in the paper. We try to, if anything, favor letters that are contrary to our opinions, although although generally we try to reflect the volume of what we get. For instance, now, of course, in San Jose, it's pretty, we believe in science out here. So, so on climate change, I'm sure 3 to 1, 4 to 1, our letters and our readers would be in favor of doing something about climate change. So that's roughly the proportion you'd probably see in the paper, although once in a while, we don't do that in a scientific way. We just try to judge it. You try to balance topics. You try to have comments that are directly on things that are in the news. You guys are great at that because you game the system beautifully. You will start out a letter talking about something in the news and then deftly turn it to, you must have classes on this. You do, okay, thank you. And you avoid, we are very sensitive to campaigns. There are a lot of, even before online form letters, there are often campaigns that you can tell they hit all the same, but yours always look individually written, so that's good. Op-eds, the standard is a little bit different. We look for some expertise on an issue, something you can say in a tagline that makes this writer worth reading a longer essay, some kind of credibility. Probably a lot of you, just for your activism, could pass the tagline test, but a lot of people are, get frustrated because they write a long and very well written opinion, but it's just because they've researched the topic or happen to believe something. And for op-eds, we try to have that extra threshold of some kind of qualification or expertise to write.
And does Ed make the decision himself about all the LTEs that get published?
Yes, pretty much. Once in a while, and I don't, these would not be climate op-eds, sometimes on local issues, which I tend to know more about, but he's going to have to learn pretty soon. He will consult with me on whether a letter is appropriate or whether what it says is factually true. We don't fact check letters the way we once did. We once had a full-time letters editor who fact-checked and called every author, although we once learned that somebody had been gaming us with a phony name for years and just had been answering the phone with that name when he had a letter out. I can't remember his name. I was trying to think. But, we don't do that now. Ed has been the letters editor for 8 or 9 years, I guess, before, no, actually longer than that, because it was before I took over as editor. But he's also a writer and editor. He edits syndicated op-eds, and so we just don't have the people that we used to have. And most of our material now, I should add, is not copy edited even. So you're seeing a lot more typos, and that's because we're writing on deadline like we always did, but we don't have anyone to catch our mistakes.
For those of you who are out of the area, the Mercury News is part of the Bay Area News Group, which has a number of newspapers. Barbara, are the standards you just mentioned, do they apply to all the Bay Area News Group newspapers, or are those just for the Merc?
I would say they're similar. The main other newspaper daily in the Bay Area News Group is the East Bay Times. Used to be the Contra Costa Times, but it merged a number of smaller dailies and weeklies a couple of years ago, and we changed it to the East Bay Times. I would say the general philosophy is the same. They have some odd policies that make no sense to me, like they don't use letters on local elections. And I feel like that's what we're here for, So, so you can't count on what I've told you being standard for any other paper, even other papers the same company owns. But generally, I think that's a fair, what I've mentioned is a fairly typical approach.
We have always been told by media people within CCL that the more we write, the more we will get published, and even if 5 of us write, that makes it more likely that 1 of us will get published. From your perspective, is that true, or does the fact that a lot of CCLers write and identify themselves as CCLers mean we're put at a disadvantage as compared to other letter writers?
It depends on the time. I have to say, if something else, something major local is happening and a lot of people are writing letters about it, or something major national that people feel strongly about, and we see a climate lobby letter come through, but we have all of these others timely and passionate from people who maybe don't write all the time, we're likely to favor them at that point, particularly since we know you'll all be back.
So likewise, someone who has never written before has an edge over somebody who has been published before.
Well, yes, to the degree that I don't really know that it's ever that careful. When I fill in, when Ed's gone, and I do the letters, some names I recognize, some I don't, but it doesn't mean they haven't been in the paper, right? We do have a 30-day limit on a particular author. We try not to use the same author twice in 30 days just to space things out, because we do have people who correspond with us daily.
Will you accept a letter that exceeds the 150-word limit if it's exceptionally well written?
No, letters pretty much, I mean, we say we'll edit them. If they're close, we'll maybe cut them down or we'll send them back. Letters, if we don't hold them to 150 words or so for the paper, as it is, we only publish, maybe 5 to 7 a day, more on Saturdays, probably about a dozen on Saturday, but we get hundreds of letters a week, and we choose to limit the length in order to get more voices in the paper. Wouldn't be if newspapers are ever, or news media are ever able to support themselves entirely online, of course length won't be as important. And we do now try to post letters one at a time with a separate headline online, and we find they get a lot more traffic a lot more reviews than they do when we publish them all together. So that's something we've started just in the last couple months, and I hope we can continue that.
Before I forget, I learned this the hard way. The Mercury News does not accept any poems as a letter to the editor.
Oh, but we get many.
What is the Mercury News' policy about letters that come in from out of, say, the Bay Area, say the 9-county Bay Area? Do you like to get them? Do you think they're less relevant because they're not from your publication area? How do you feel?
Well, they could be online readers, so we don't rule them out. But generally, if somebody's writing from Toledo, probably we would pass on that. If it's about something local, we sometimes get. This is funny, but police issues. We sometimes get letters from Hawaii, because a lot of police officers retired Hawaii. So I, just kind of look for that. And but people all over the world can read what's online, so we don't automatically rule it out just because it's from far away.
Does it make a difference if the letter to the editor is written in response to something that has been written by a Mercury News reporter or a Bay Area News Group reporter, as opposed to a syndicated article from the AP or something like that?
Not really, although something that has happened locally or that's going on locally is always going to be our focus, and I think only more so as the staff contracts, because it's the value added we have. I mean, you can go anywhere it's just like we don't write very many national editorials anymore. We mostly write about regional, state, or our local communities, because we can't do everything, and nobody else is doing San Jose issues and, Silicon Valley quite the way we do, so that's what we focus on.
You bring up another topic right now, and that is the new policy in which you and Ed Clendennial were writing op-eds instead of editorials on a couple of occasions.
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah, and I guess the couple of questions is, number one, how has that been received by the public? And number two, I know that a number of people within our organization said, please don't do that. We want more of a chance to get our editorial position published, or we want our op-ed published, or, please.
Well, nothing changed with publishing material from outside the paper. The reason we started writing more columns, not when there's an important issue that we need to stake out a position on, like I wrote on for tomorrow's paper about preferring a one-tunnel option for bringing BART to downtown San Jose, and I could have written that as a column, but that's a big decision, and we decided, no, this should be an editorial. Sometimes we can make things more interesting by tossing in some personal insights, and frankly, online, which is the future, unfortunately, the kids, I would venture to say most of us in this room still read a newspaper, but you get to the 30-year-olds and they don't know what you're talking about. They may read our stories, but they probably read them on a phone. So the future is online, and generally byline pieces get more attention, more readers online, and that's one of the main reasons we're doing that.
And can you give us any tips on how to get op-eds published, besides expertise?
Yeah, expertise, tying to something that's happening now, something just very general and philosophical. I'm going to use the first person because I'll be there for another week and a half, but this will apply, I think, to Ed too. Something very general and beautifully written and nice. You might say, yeah, we'd like to use this, but what tends to happen is other timelier material comes in, and those general pieces tend to get buried, and sometimes they'll run eventually if we hit a dry spell of timely issues. So for climate, if there's a new report and there's some local insight or application to the Bay Area that you can bring to it, that's another thing. Or we have syndicated columnists in Washington. We have a number of Washington Post columnists that we use. Not the New York Times anymore, unfortunately, so Tom Friedman is gone, but we have some good columnists, but they're doing the national issues and national politics. So anyone who can bring insight to what's going on in the Bay Area, that will be a value added for us.
You mentioned before maybe a ratio of maybe 5 letters to 1 in terms of like, if you get 5 letters on one side, you'll publish 1 on the other? Or is there a preferred ratio you like to have in order to show balance?
Well, I'm not sure what the 5 instance was. I was saying in the Bay Area. It's probably the... well, we generally try to reflect, as I said, if letters are running 3-2, say, anti-Trump, or maybe 5-1 anti-Trump. That would be, you'd see more anti-Trump letters than pro. However, we do a kind of affirmative action for unpopular views, and if there is if we're not getting a lot of letters at all on the other side, and one pops up and it's a usable letter, we will try to get that in. Often people say, well, you know, your letters aren't balanced, and you know, we have to deal with what we get, and we don't commission letters to the editor, so sometimes it's just a matter of nobody having taken the time to written. I went to a couple of years ago, the Conservative Forum of Silicon Valley had a major anniversary celebration convention. It was somewhere up the peninsula here, and it was huge, thousands of people in this room. And they wanted me to come, and I did. I didn't speak, but I was there. And one of the things they talked about from the podium was they're celebrating their their success at getting more letters published, because they had caught on to some of the things that you folks do all the time, which is you know, jumping on issues and you know, they'd followed my instructions, frankly, because I'd gotten tired of their calling, why don't you write any, you know, publish any letters, you know, saying Donald Trump is wonderful, and haven't gotten any. You've got to write them, you know, so.
Because of the 150...
By the way, I apologize if there are some huge Donald Trump fans here. I just popped into my mind as an example.
Okay. Because of the 150-word limit on letters to the editor, we usually don't submit sources. Would that be helpful to you? We have done it before in op-eds. We've sent in like one clean copy of an op-ed and another copy that had footnotes to it so you could see where our sources were.
No, unless you're writing about something that really is counterintuitive or is not part of the, you know, the general knowledge. Usually letters aren't, you know, if a letter is really out there and you think someone may pass on it just because it doesn't seem grounded in fact, and you have a source, then sure, do that. But most times our selection process is not that rigorous, and our fact-checking, if something jumps out at us just not looking right, we will check it, but we don't do what we did at one time, which is to check every assertion in every letter.
Okay. Are any of the practices or policies that you've described different for the online version of the Mercury News? And I want to make a distinction here, because in conversations I've had today, there's been some discussion about this, and that is, there's the online version that looks just like what's in the print paper, and then there's the version that's on the website, which is a completely different format, even if the content is more or less the same. And one of the questions I got today that I couldn't answer, because I'm not a big Facebook person, is there another version that's different on Facebook?
We have pages on Facebook. We used to have our own for the editorial page. Now we just go with the Mercury News page, promote our material. It's not a version of the paper. It is an attempt to call attention to some of the material that's out there. So you'll sort of promote a story or an editorial on Facebook with a link to it. The two versions you're referring to, there are actually three. There's a mobile app, which is just a nightmare. So if you haven't already, don't bother looking for it if you haven't already tried to use it. The e-edition, the paper the online edition that looks just like the paper and you can page through it, that is published the same morning the paper is published. Looks just like it is a copy of, page by page copy of the actual newspaper. Some things can be linked from that of course you can't link from paper, but it's based on that day's paper. Online, you might find stories sometimes that come and go and never make the paper because we are limited in size. You know, the print product is finite and the web isn't. And sometimes someone will write a quick story about something that's very timely, but by the time we're putting together the next day's paper, it doesn't seem as important as some other things. And may never or may take days to show up in print. Basically, when stories are written, most times they're going to go online pretty quickly and may take a day or two to get in the paper.
So the policies are basically the same, but you've got a little more space, or a lot more space, and a little more latitude with the online version.
Yeah, latitude, not latitude in standards. I mean, we keep the same standards, and anything that runs online would meet any standard for the paper, but there is more room out there. So.
Looking at the big picture, what is the best way for CCL to make its case in newspapers in general, but specifically in the Mercury News?
Well, keep in mind, and this is a side thing really, keep in mind that when you are writing for an editorial page, particularly in California and Northern California, you're probably writing mostly to like-minded thinkers. So I would think about if you're trying to win people over, look for other ways to do that as well. I mean, newspapers can, actually some of our best readership is of Victor Davis Hanson, who's a very conservative columnist online. He has a tremendous following. So you could write a letter about Victor Davis and probably get a lot of readership. Letter writing is a good idea because it keeps it's short. People do tend to read letters in the paper. People who buy the paper, we hear from them that they read letters and editorials. Editorials, I think more paper subscribers pay attention to the traditional institutional opinions like editorials. Some of the online-only readers may not, and that may be why the columns tend to be more popular online. But letters are a good way to keep something in people's minds. Op-eds are great if there's room for them. I don't know what the pages are going to be like in the future at the Mercury News, but Chronicle, lots of other papers publish op-eds, and I think that works. I don't know if you're in an area, where are you all from? Is everyone here Bay Area or?
No, all over Northern California.
Okay.
Basically from South Bay to the Oregon border and from the coast all the way inland.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So, I mean, if you will know your local paper, and I would encourage you to make a contact with either a reporter that you see writing about issues that are applicable. If there's an editorial page editor like me, who's identifiable as a human being, have the conversation. Okay. That's the best, because it will vary. It varies based on the space. It varies based on the paper's priorities, its audience. I really can't speak for other publications.
Okay. Who's got questions?
Thank you. A quick thanks and a question. The thanks is thank you for publishing an op-ed I wrote on Green Prize using some of the cap and trade funds in California for Green Prizes and climate innovation. So
right.
That was a few years ago. Daniel Yost, thank you for that. The question is, at what point in the legislative process is most useful for you in terms of publishing something? So for example, if legislation is being drafted, is that a good time for us to weigh in? If it's in committee hearings, is that a good time to weigh in? If it's up for a vote, next week, is that the time? And this could apply to Sacramento as well as DC.
Right. Well, one thing we tend not to do is write ourselves or publish material about bills that maybe are proposed but aren't even out there yet. Because so many things are talked about but never even go to a first committee. But otherwise, my personal feeling, and we don't always have the time to do it for editorials, but letter writers certainly can, I would say when something is coming up on a committee vote or in the process but not too far along, that's a good time to get out there. We will do that on occasion when we see something coming that we hope will continue. The other reason to do that is you don't want to send a letter today that is going to be outdated tomorrow if there's going to be a vote, so try to be a little earlier about it. But I think for letter writing, I mean at any stage, but the more timely it seems, the more likely it is to come to the attention of the legislator, and most of them do watch, have an aggressive search out there online for anything that mentions their name or anything that mentions a bill they're working on. So is that helpful? Okay. Yes, naming a legislator is a good thing. That will pick up on a search.
Hi. First of all, thank you for making time. I understand you came straight from the Women's March. That's great.
Me too. That's right.
Yeah. And no, I'm thanking you. And also for your years of service, really on our behalf.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate that. So my question relates to kind of the idea of the paper, quote, having taken a position on something. People sometimes say, well, the Mercury News hasn't really taken a position on a revenue-neutral carbon tax. I said, well, actually, back in October of 2014, in the context, and I've actually sent links to people.
I remember writing that. I was thinking of John, actually. Well, at least I'll throw this in. Yeah. Well, do you want to?
No, I think that's
okay.
Just to finish the thought is that is it appropriate for us to characterize the Mercury News as, quote, being in favor of a revenue-neutral carbon tax because, hey, you can go look at it, it's still online, et cetera, or should we be pushing, for something that's more concrete? I'm thinking, for example, the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat ran an editorial that, mentioned our organization and said carbon fee and dividend and had some details. I mean, that's kind of the home run, but I'm trying to get a sense of, should we be pushing for something more explicit, or would you say it's fair to say the Mercury News is already in favor of our proposal?
I think you can certainly say that, and it's been mentioned more than once as the best strategy. For us, writing an editorial, first of all, keep in mind that for more than half the time I've been editor, I have just had one person, Ed Clendaniel, and me, and now there will just only be Ed. When I took the editor's job, I had 5 people. When I, 8 years earlier than that, there were 12 people on the editorial board. When I came to the Mercury News in, it'll be 30 years this summer, there were 9 people on the editorial board. And so now, we're down to 2, and in a few weeks we'll be down to 1. So the topics are going to be limited. And this goes to the timeliness of Mr. Yost's question as well. If something is not on the radar as likely to be in play, we are less likely to take that up and take the time to research and carefully write an editorial in support of it when we know, for instance, in this administration, there is not going to be major climate legislation. And we also increasingly, as our numbers dwindle, focus more on local issues. Sometimes they're national, DACA, there are lots of national issues that are extremely important here. And climate change is, we've got the Bay, there are a lot of very direct local implications, but unless legislation has prayer. We are unlikely to write that, to take the time to write that editorial when there are other things that we might be able to influence better. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Hi. I also want to thank you and say that I'm sad to hear that you're downsizing again, that I'm a huge fan of the press, and it's sort of heartbreaking to see what's happening.
For me too. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And we will be meeting Friday, 3 of us from the East Bay, with Dan Borenstein at the East Bay Times. We have a very brief amount of time, and now I understand why.
Dan has been alone up there since October.
Yes.
The previous editor retired and was not replaced. Now, we work closely with him and share some material that we agree on, although we don't always agree.
A little disagreement is a good thing.
It is, and we really I like to have things that I can, when people say, oh, you're just one big organization, someone's telling you what to do, I'll say, no, look at this,
But I wonder if you have any advice for us so that we can make the best use of the short amount of time we have to talk to him. Obviously, we'd like him to follow in the footsteps of the Mercury News and endorse revenue-neutral carbon tax, but I understand from what you're saying that's probably not in the cards. So I wonder if you have some advice for us.
You're right. Dan is definitely, he's been more limited in capacity for longer than we have. And I'm sorry, I keep moving this and it's probably very annoying. He will agree with you. No, you don't have to go in and convince him. He's a very smart guy and believes in science and everything. So, you can meet him on that level. I don't think you'll get very far arguing for the editorial, but ask him what you've been asking me. What can you do? What can the paper do to help give a voice to what you are arguing? And I'm not sure he gets as many local op-eds up there as we do. We actually share some Bay Area non-syndicated material that's relevant to all of us. I think I get a lot more down here. I have more loquacious folks that tend to send in op-eds, but just approach it. He's a smart guy. Assume he knows the basics, and if he doesn't, if he doesn't seem to understand something, then sure, enlighten him. But I think you'll find him in agreement, but probably feeling the same way I do about writing that editorial.
Yes, one of the things that I have assumed is that the letters that we write do have some effect on the kinds of stories that the paper will run. Is that true? To what extent is that true? And if it's true, what is it that we can do to promote the kinds of stories that we would like to see?
I would say that is not true. There was a time when we had a lot more reporters doing, many things that we no longer cover. That someone might have seen a letter and said, "Wow, that's something. There could be a good story there." I would say, this is not just now, but in recent years, it's unlikely that a letter, unless it's about something that is totally unknown and it maybe implies corruption or is in some way affects people and people don't know about it, that might happen, but I would not assume that happens. And I would not assume that large numbers of letters on a topic would lead to more coverage of that topic because the limitation of people, the decisions on coverage are just not going to be made that way. The other thing is the editorial pages at our paper, and I think at most papers, are pretty seriously separate from the news pages. And, I report to the executive editor, but I am not, nothing I do affects the news side. Sometimes I'll learn things and, we'll share information. And that can go both ways. But as far as what we're covering, there are times that I write editorials about issues that we haven't even had news stories on, because I think they're important. These would be local issues. And, sometimes that leads to a news story later, but most times not, because those choices are being made on a different basis.
We're at our time, but before we end, I should have done this at the beginning, but it just hit me after we started. If you are a regular reader of the Mercury News or another Bay Area News Group newspaper, put your hand and keep it up. Okay, now, if
God bless you.
No, keep your hands up, please. Okay, now, if you have gotten a letter to the editor published in any of those newspapers, keep it up. Okay, now, if you've gotten more than one letter to the editor published, keep it up. Okay, just to give you some idea.
Okay, these are the champions.
Okay. Okay. And Carl stole my thunder a little bit ago. I was going to thank Barbara, especially for coming, since she did come here directly from the Women's March. Thank you so much for this enlightening talk, for 30 years of service to the community, and for especially the last 10 years. It's been a pleasure working with you, both way back when on open space and more recently, and we hope to work with you on issues going forward.
My intention is to do some work professionally, but certainly to absolutely stay engaged in the community. We are in Willow Glen forever. That is our plan. So we'll be around and happy to keep in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you all.